Hi, this is Phil Brinley from Expertise Recruitment. Welcome to our Agile West Midlands event. And tonight we've got Russell Rhodes speaking from ASOS. Hope you enjoy.
Can everybody see that? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
I just need to move around my own monitors. I've got 3 screens and I've got my presentation but lost my notes, which would be nice to have. Brilliant. Got those back. Yeah, cool, thanks. Yeah, if anyone does have any questions along the way, Phil, if you could just keep me honest on that. If they're popping up and I don't see them out of the corner of my eye, feel free to nudge me and I'm happy to answer questions as we go through things. So in terms of overview of the things that I'm going to talk about this evening, I'll give a little introduction to me and who I am and my background, so you know where I'm coming from. Then going to talk about how I've applied Agile in some new areas this year. Because of the year 2020 has been, you know, we've been at home, we've been at work, the boundaries between work and home have blurred a little bit. So I thought I'd share a bit about life at home and how I've applied Agile there as well as at work. So I'm going to talk a bit about teaching and how homeschool went and the journey that was. The main focus is going to be about engineering management and a people-focused engineering manager role as I've been doing for the last few months, how I've applied Agile practices in sort of 5 specific aspects of that. A bit more chat about home and how Agile's helped me with reshuffling houses, rooms around the house, sorry, for a few things recently. And then some thoughts about what I've learned through this journey and where I might take Agile next as well. A couple of disclaimers on it, that the tools and techniques that I'm discussing aren't new. Some of them have been in use for several decades, so they may well be things that you're already familiar with, but perhaps not applied to some of the areas I'm going to talk about. I'm very much on a journey of discovering new things through experimentation either, so I'm not pretending that these are like perfectly polished solutions that you can just take and use anywhere. But there are hopefully some interesting ideas upon things to try. And it'd be great to share your contributions about other ideas to try as well. You know, I'm open to learning things here this evening as well. And I guess my hope is that, you know, maybe 1 or 2 things I share today generate an idea for where you two could maybe apply an old practice in a new situation. So yeah, a little bit about me. I was originally a hands-on software engineer. I did this for about 7 years or so. And I like to make the work that I do more efficient through spotting problems, improving processes and automating things. And that led me into doing hands-off roles because I realized that I could start to add more value by fixing processes that improve the day for dozens of people rather than just fixing my own code. So since 2013, I've been an Agile experimenter. I got to go on a really good Scrum Master training course that really whet my appetite for what Agile could achieve. I've been in various roles as a Scrum Master, Development Manager, and Delivery Manager since then. And at the start of 2020, I was a Agile Delivery Manager at ASOS, had been in that position for about 3 years then. It's a position that blended line management with being a Scrum Master, so I was regularly practicing Scrum, Kanban, XP, and Lean techniques with the teams that I was working with. And that's a role that I understood and I was generally quite happy with. And yeah, then COVID hit. And one of the first major impacts that sort of really shook things up for me was a good old homeschool, which was yeah, quite an eye-opener for parents everywhere. Never have we been so grateful for teachers. So thrown into this situation, then I've got to be a teacher as well as doing my normal day job, now doing that remotely from home. This is completely new. What do I do? And I think I turn to a few things that I think a lot of people do when they're in a situation like this. One is underestimating it and thinking, yeah, well, this will be all right. How hard can it be? My son's only in reception. This will be fine. And the other was, I'll try and apply what I know, and therefore, I can stay in my comfort zone. I can control this situation. So I was a Scrum Master. I know Scrum. That's a great framework for high uncertainty and complexity. I'm sure this will help me out, and it'll make everything nice and straightforward to do. And so in order to get through the week of homeschool, I started applying a lightweight Scrum framework at home. So had a chat with my wife about how we'd do this. We had a weekly planning session on a Sunday evening. We did what you might term refinement, when we sort of went about defining some of the details about how we were going to execute our lessons, delivered the lessons during the day. And then at the end of the week, we did a review, a retrospective, along with a big sigh of relief and usually a bottle of wine as well. But it didn't work straight off. So yeah, I discovered that maybe I'm a better Scrum Master than I am a teacher. So what went wrong with this? First of all, was actually planning far too much up front. So somebody from an Agile background ought to have known better than this, but I definitely bit off more than I could chew at first. So I put in place a structured routine of all the things that we were going to do during the day, which involved getting up at 6 o'clock every morning and finishing with putting the kids to bed at about 8 in the evening, which was pretty exhausting. And also in terms of then sort of thinking through lesson planning, there was hundreds of education options, to the point that I think is a common problem in other areas of life these days. There's too much choice. How do I analyze which one to go with? And forever trying to find this one might be slightly better, or what about that one? It probably got to its worst where I decided I was going to try and take a theme and join all these lessons together in some way, and space theme, planets and rockets. That would be really fun. And then found myself trying to plan lessons until midnight every night, and realized I perhaps lost it a little bit and was going a bit OTT with this. Also found that my development team, my 2 children, they weren't always interested. We don't want to do school. We're at home. Why are we doing this? What's going on in the world? And in terms of this one, then there was some sort of needing to learn a bit more about, obviously, their interests, how they would apply things, particularly for my son Matthew, who we were trying to teach at the time, and then putting things in a way that he wanted to work with, and then also learning when was his energy high, when is his energy low, and how do we go with that. So how did Agile help with this? Well, I guess the good thing is that we failed fast, and due to applying that lightweight Scrum framework, started to see some of the problems after the first week. And then over time started to take on less activities. So actually, the amount of planning and things I was doing, that wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep going on with that. So maybe we'll focus on doing one thing in the morning, one thing in the afternoon. And over time, we were then starting less, but actually starting to finish more, and felt a bit satisfied by that. And that generated the opportunity to actually have some thinking time about what we were doing, as well as just doing the doing, because the day was sort of too chock-a-block before. Lots of learning by mistakes, learning by doing. So there wasn't lots of planning up front for things that we're going to deliver weeks later. It was dive into a lesson. Okay, that went wrong. What can we do the next time? And over time, we did get better with that as well. I think I also learned to do Scrum better, to be honest, as well, which is interesting. So as I mentioned, to start off with, I'd planned far too much up front. I'd taken too much on. Some of the planning sessions that we were doing were a little bit rushed and produced plans which were perhaps a bit unachievable. Shamefully, my retrospectives, our home retrospectives, lacked clear owners and the commitment to fix them. So we got into that situation of some happened and some didn't. And I guess a reflection that I had on the back of this was that we can all forget our Agile training sometimes when we're applying Agile to a new situation, or while we're faced with a new situation. And it can often be actually those situations that are unexpected, they're unusual, or they're complex. And it's in those actually our Agile training is of most value to us. But those can be the very situations where we forget about that. And on this one, I've got a question, which is, when did you last face a situation where you forgot your Agile training? I'll mention with this, I think I missed in my introduction with this, as I talk throughout this, I've got a couple of question points to try and share back a reflection of something that I've thought about during this year. This is intended just to prompt something for you guys to reflect about and see if there's anything that prompts a thought for you. You're welcome to share these in the chat as we go through so that other people can see them as well. If you want to discuss it, that's okay as well, but I'm generally going to keep going rather than stopping for 10 minutes to discuss each one as we go. So yeah, homeschool, that was a challenge. Thankfully it came to an end, and back to work, great, back to doing the thing that I like. But then 2020 being the year it is, change came again, and this time it was a role change for me at work. So no longer working as a agile delivery manager, which was this Scrum Master, line manager hybrid role that I've been doing and enjoying for a good number of years, but changing to be an engineering manager, which is a very people-focused role, doing line management for a lot of people, helping out with our recruitment, our training, think about those processes, but not being delivery focused anymore. So sort of missing that part of the role. And a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues posed an interesting question about, does an engineering manager have to be agile? And thoughts were going through my head about, well, what do I do with all this agile stuff that I've learned? And this is really sort of the focus of my discussion this evening, is to talk about how, even though agile is taken out of the official job title as it was, it's not taken out of me. And this is about how I've applied and expanded my agile thoughts and processes into the role that I do now, where maybe agile's not always been as considered before. And so I've got 5 different areas. There's lots of different elements to the role I could go through, but there's 5 ones that I'm going to talk about this evening. First of these then focuses on teamwork. So as a default, being a line manager can sometimes actually be quite lonely, especially during a year where we're all working from home. A manager will work alone with their teams. They're obviously working with different individuals in their teams from day to day, but different managers don't necessarily speak to each other, and the standards they apply can diverge over time, if indeed they were the same to start with over time. The lessons learned aren't shared, and some of the same mistakes get repeated. And this is something that I think I've seen in various different roles throughout my career happen. So what would be better, and how could an agile practice help us out here? An approach that I've taken with a colleague in my current role is to pair on it. So this is taking the concept of pair programming from extreme programming, where 2 developers would work together whilst writing a piece of code. They give each other regular feedback on things as they're going, learn new things, share information, and spot mistakes. So we're trying to do the same thing with our roles as well. So how I'm applying this is I'm sharing most things that I do with a colleague and inviting feedback every week. We're having several meetings during the week where we catch up and we talk about difficult situations that we've faced during the role, the things that we plan to do, and how we plan to do that. And it's kept us both really honest on the scope of what we do, what we can and can't commit to between us. It's kept good consistency between that we're taking a fair and equal approach, which when it comes to a subject like line management, that fairness and consistency is really important. And we've challenged each other and thought about new alternatives and things that we can do as well. It's something that I think requires a high level of trust. You have to be quite vulnerable with the other person. And, during the conversations we have, we sort of proactively apologize for things where we think we might have made a mistake, and then seek feedback upon how could I do that better. So, for example, if we've done a joint interview and we've spoken to a candidate and we sort of get partway through and think we've not got the right person here, I might typically sort of say, actually, look, I think I could have done better on the filtering stage of this. How can we improve that for next time? Which has been some really valuable discussions we've had. And as a result of this time investment, which is, sort of a small number of hours a week that we make and working together, we're doing a much higher quality job of management and catching mistakes earlier. And the value of that's quite significant, because when it comes to line managing a group of 15 to 20 people, a mistake that's made and repeated that many times can cause a cultural cascade, which might take months to put right. So those hours that we put in are definitely paying back. Another thing that I've found with the way that we work upon things in the past, where I've tried to work with other managers to get things done, is we tend to have quite a lot of initiatives started, but little finished. So the activities that fell outside of the sprint work that I was used to, there'd be loads and loads of great ideas, and each week we'd think of, yeah, here's another 3 things that we could do. But then the next week there'd be another 3, and the next week another 3, and so on. And sort of the latest stuff tends to surface to the top, and other things didn't come through so much. So again, what agile practices could I apply to this situation to think about how can we help do that in a better way? One is applying the regular cadence. So the sprint of Scrum, it's not a strict sprint that we're running, but the idea that we work in a weekly cycle, and we do some planning and we look at getting some feedback at the end of the week. So one of the things that we've applied that's worked really well for us, between myself and my other colleague who's doing a lot of management in our area at the moment, is synchronizing our calendars. So if we're doing one-to-ones, we try and make sure we're doing those at the same time, so we're unavailable to each other at the same time, but also available to work together at the same time where we do want to do joint activities. We're inspecting and adapting at the end of each week. So again, if we do make a mistake, we spot it quick, we put a lid on it, and we find a way to do things better than next week. And managing unplanned work is quite a challenge for us. There's a lot of unexpected things that come in a people management role. You can't see everything at the start of the week. And so applying some Kanban and DevOps principles for how we handle this work when it does start to surface. One of which is to log it and expose it. So actually understanding how much work is coming in. It requires a bit of discipline to actually take 10 seconds each time there's a new request that's going to take more than a few seconds to deal with, of right, here's this thing, and to write that down. And then exposing it. I've got a simple chart illustration on this slide here, which is showing how much work I was getting coming in and how quickly my backlog was growing as well. And you can sort of see at first, I can learn from this that the backlog was growing exponentially. I was getting a lot of additional work each week and wasn't able to catch up, but then found ways through the inspecting and adapting we did to handle that better, to delegate some of that more, and I've now brought it to a place where it's sort of flatline. So it's almost sustainable. There's still a backlog that needs burning down, but we're getting better there. And another thing that's worked for this is setting aside some time to handle those sort of expedited items where we get new challenges coming in. So literally blocking aside time in the calendar each day, which is designed for doing nothing, in the knowledge that during the day things will come in and there is now some time to handle it, rather than being fully booked and being unable to do it. So on the topic of teamwork, this prompted another sort of reflection question about, in your role for the activities you do outside of agile software delivery, where it might be people management, stakeholder management, or other things, who could you pair with? Who could be the rubber duck and hold the mirror up when you need them to? And what feedback might be hard to ask for, but actually really helpful to your future self? So who could you open yourself up to and say, I think I'm making a mistake here. How can you help me with that? Because that's something that, again, I've found really valuable. Okay. Next topic is one-to-ones. Now, this is one of those things that there's just loads of different ways of doing. I could probably do an entire presentation just on this. So I'm just going to go through one, really. Again, a default position about one-to-one experience throughout my career at lots of different companies is that they can be quite surface level. People tend to avoid conflict, and we talk around some of the hard stuff. We can often start unprepared as well. People come into a one-to-one, and I've been through various different discussions over the years of asking, right, what do you want to talk about today? And yeah, I'm not really sure is quite a common response. And sometimes they can end without clear actions as well. So, as I say, there's various different techniques that we can use in one-to-ones, but one agile one which I found useful during some conversations is to take simple structures from a retrospective, which is something that we're familiar with applying through Scrum. One example of this is a nice start, stop, continue. It's a really simple format. It comes with the benefit that software engineers are well used to applying this to inspect the team, so they understand the questions, they understand the purpose of what it's trying to ask. And it's a framework which naturally leads us to start to prepare to self-inspect in a safe way, and then prepares us that, okay, we're going to work towards some actions for how we move forward out of that. A technique I've applied with this, which I found really helpful for individuals, is to make it a two-way feedback discussion as well. And so what we do here is that ahead of the one-to-one, I would invite the individual to think about what they could start, stop and continue, but also give me feedback as a manager about what I could start, stop and continue. And then I do the same with them. I give them some feedback upon what they could do and self-reflect for myself upon what I can start, stop and continue. And there's a bit of a lead by example bit there, in that by doing some of that self-reflection, by demonstrating to them, actually I can recognize that I've made mistakes and I can now positively think about how I can do things differently in future. It gives, a good example of how to work with that. As I mentioned, various different ways we could do that, so I'm not sort of spending too long upon this particular topic. I think where I'd like to take it in future is to sort of build up a bit of a cookbook of different strategies for how this could be done, and then have those available as templates a team member could choose from. Next one is objectives, and this is one that I'll spend a little bit longer on because it's kind of a pet topic of something I feel like I've been battling away at for years in a few roles now. And the common situation that I've seen for this is you turn up to a stand-up with a team and everybody talks about, what I did yesterday, what am I doing today, and have I got any blockers? And then it comes around to one or two people and their update is, today I'm working on objectives. And nobody in the team sort of says anything about this, and they carry on around with the rest of the updates. And I've always found that really concerning, that somebody in the team said, I'm doing some work that's not sprint work, but I'm not telling you about it and you don't know about it. And there's no questions asked about that. So through having a privately owned objectives, what's happening is that colleagues in the rest of the team don't really know what's going on, and they can miss learning and feedback opportunities for working with that individual. It's possible that multiple people could actually be doing the same thing or conflicting things without knowing about what each other are doing as well. A lot of companies for a number of years now have also sort of set this thing about objectives as something that you do at the start of the year as well, and they can be something that it's long done over a period of time. And if we think back to if we'd started doing that at the start of this calendar year, if people had had objectives that they'd set in January 2020, how many of those objectives would have still been valid come April 2020, given the level of change that we went through, which is obviously a bit of an extreme example. Hopefully no year is going to go through quite this level of change again. But every year, every business does have some change in it, and these longer objectives are far greater risk of becoming obsolete before they've been completed. And we also have a situation where multiple objectives are being worked upon in parallel. So people have these long running objectives. There might be sort of say 3 or 4 per individual that they're trying to run with. And this can cause a huge level of workload and context switching between the team. And I've got a simple visual just to talk through what I see happening with this. So we start off with an individual who's got their own objective, and that's okay. And then we've got another 4 people in a team. So we've now got 5 people who each have an objective. So they've got 1 each. However, as they start to get into it, they realize that Maybe there's something they need to discuss with colleagues, maybe there's a dependency on another skill, or maybe they need somebody to approve a pull request or something to get a piece of work done. And so let's say they work on a couple of objectives each and have dependencies on other people. And we start to get this thing that's starting to go on now. So if each person's dependency on 2 people, they've got 4 bits of communication that are going on as some people depend on them as they depend on others. And that's quite a lot of sort of context switching and cognitive load that the team's now taking on. So how can Agile help us with objectives? What would be an Agile way of approaching that? I'd suggest that, again, in Scrum, we focus very much upon teamwork, everybody working together as a team, working towards one goal. And objectives can be the same. And through strengthening those connections between individuals about working on an objective, we can reduce the number of interactions and interconnectivity that's required on different things. So people still interact, they still work together, but this is now upon something that's shared rather than each trying to get help upon their individual aims that they're pulling through. Through doing this, we're also making them transparent, so everybody understands the work that's being done. They can give each other feedback earlier and will produce a higher quality result because we've got a greater number of inputs working together on it. We can maximize the work not done because before, if we had 5 people who had 5 objectives each, there's 25 things we're trying to do, and maybe not all of those are of the highest value. We're perhaps now going to work on just 5 things together as a team, but we'll have filtered out which ones are the most valuable towards the top. And the other thing that we really benefit from here then is sort of making sure that we get faster feedback as well. So rather than that an objective being set over a year, again, let's do that over a shorter iteration and we'll get our results faster, we'll fail faster, we'll succeed faster. To get that fast feedback, we need to have some narrow scope for what we're trying to do. So this is similar to another Agile concept of breaking down a user story, trying to make sure, as we would do then, that it's not overrunning a sprint boundary and it can be fit within a short space of time, all for the purpose of fast feedback. We can apply the same approach of breaking things down to an objective as well. But defining boundaries at the start and end point of an objective can be a hard thing to do. And when we start to talk about, can you write down a key result or how do we measure this? It can all feel a bit wordy, and most of the engineers I work with don't like things that are wordy or where there's ambiguity or subjectivity. We prefer things that are numerical, they're clear, it's a pass or a fail, it's a yes or a no. So how can we help them with putting together objectives that are in this more wordy territory? What I started to reflect on here recently is that engineers have evolved controls around language where there's other tricky corners. And why don't we reuse some of those controls that everybody's already familiar with to express these more wordy concepts in clearer terms? My current favorite that I'm using quite a lot with objectives that I'm working on with some of my team members at the moment is to take a test-driven development approach. So this is another extreme programming practice where a developer would write a failing test before they write any code. So they've got a test, this is what the system should do, and that test fails because no code is written. They write the smallest amount of code in order to make the test pass, and then they get confirmation. Great, that test works, we know we've done it, and then they'd continue to refactor that as well. So for a test-driven objective, any objective that we do is ideally going to lead to an uplift in the capability either of the individual or of the team. We want to improve something. So if we think about what does today look like, we've not improved that at the start. So we should be able to set out a test that today can't pass about what we want our future state to be that we can't do today. And with that, when we do make it pass, we can look back hopefully with real satisfaction about being able to understand that I couldn't do that thing now, and now as a result of the activity I've done for the objective, now I can, and that should feel good as well. that's just one example of a structure that I've used recently that I think's helped. I think also others, definition of done, behavior-driven development, and single responsibility principle are others where these are sort of ways of controlling language and making things a bit more specific that our engineers are already familiar with from other agile practices that can actually work quite well in this context for defining the scope and objective. Reflection question in relation to this one. Does your objective system incentivize team or individual performance? And which do you want from this? And for yourself or for individuals in your team, when you take on an objective, do you usually find that you've taken on too much or too little? Okay. Fourth area to discuss this evening of the engineering manager role, training. And we've sort of been tasked with what training can we identify for people, what training courses should we put on, and what advantages can they get out of this. And the default position of training is these can be significant programs that often encourage large investment or significant dependencies. So, for example, you might go on a 5-day course to go and learn all about cloud computing. Or sometimes it might be a half-day course that's actually got 5 days content squeezed into it. Occasionally, if you're lucky, depending upon how you feel about it, you might even get a year-long program of regular training and lots of catch-ups that are happening at different individuals. Sometimes training's handed out almost top-down in bulk by some initiative, or because the training budget's finally been opened up for the first time in 3 years and we need to spend it all whilst it's there. But I don't think this is terribly effective. And the reason I've got a picture of my piano there, which is in my office here with me at the moment, was I was sat looking at it and then sort of reflected, how do musicians practice? So music is something that I used to do. And if I had a typical piano lesson, I'd turn up to this lesson, I'd play some music for about 3 minutes. I'd get some feedback from my teacher who would explain, here's some stuff that went well, here's some stuff that didn't, and here's how you can make it a bit better. And then I'd try again. And then as part of that trying again, I'd break it down into small chunks, try a tiny bit at first, get the small bits right, and then put the tiny pieces back together into a bigger piece and try again. Then we'd try the next bit. But there were lots of really small cycles of learning something, maybe having it demonstrated and practicing it. And this was happening sort of a couple of minutes of tuition, followed by a couple of minutes practice, tuition and practice. So training that either provides a lot of training up front without the opportunity to practice straight away, especially where sometimes there's a gap in between the training being delivered and then when the training's being recalled, doesn't work. And there's a little bit of brain science that backs this as well. I've not got the sources to hand to quote this, but my understanding is essentially that whenever you repeat an activity or whenever you recall something from your memory, you're literally making the connections between different neurons in your brain stronger. So that habit about learning something, then practicing it, repeating it, learning a bit more and practicing it is actually more effective for the brain to learn rather than having a big bulk approach and doing things later. So where does this fit into agile practices? I've sort of come to an approach at the minute of thinking about what's the minimum viable training. Actually, is it required in the first place? What's the solution? What's the problem, sorry, that we're trying to solve with the solution? Why do we need the training rather than the training just happens to be available because somebody's given the budget to us? What is it that we want to achieve from it? And then fast feedback. So if we don't practice it straight away, we're going to start to lose the information over time. So again, I think test-driven development comes to mind with this, about the test of, I can't do this thing, practice it a bit more. Okay, now I can do that. And to change the usual dry acronym, I think in this case, do repeat yourself, because that repetition is really good for learning. And as per the musical example there as well, breaking it down into small pieces. And a point that I reflected upon this recently was going on one of these courses, which was a bit like this half-day course with 5 days worth of content thrown into it. And I remember sitting there and thinking, I'm not going to get the benefit of maybe half or 2/3 of this course because it's just too much information in one go, and smaller bite-sized chunks would have actually been a better way for me to take that on at that time. And the final topic in relation to the engineering management stuff that I'm doing at the moment is recruitment. And again, how do we do that better? What I've noticed in this is that actually when we do recruitment in a business, there's often many different aims about what we're looking for. So you'd think everybody has a shared goal of wanting to get people in, but it tends to be that the internal talent team have got an objective that they need to get the best value possible from the business. So let's not pay agency fees because we want to save and get the minimum cost that we can. But contrast that to the aims of the delivery team. They want someone super experienced who can hit the ground running as soon as possible. They've got a delivery target to hit, and they know that if they slip that delivery target by a month, say, that might cost the business hundreds of thousands of pounds. The agency fees are trivial. They're quite happy to pay the cost for that. And then maybe the manager's got a goal of they want to bring in more junior engineers and train them to balance skills and experience and have staff that have got a long-term future of how they can develop in the company over time. It also tends to be an activity where it tends to come in quite significant surges. Again, maybe headcount signed off because it's the start of the financial year and there's a lot of budget. So we do lots of hiring in one go and then none for a while. And then there's another burst where there's a lot that comes through at once. So it sort of goes against that sustainable pace that we would like to have ideally. And when that sustainable pace isn't there, then the things aren't practiced often and lessons get forgotten. And we come back to do another surge in hiring and maybe forget some of the things that we learned on a previous occasion. So what can we apply from Agile to help us with this? I think one thing is getting everybody together on the same page of having a shared goal. So getting those different requirements of the internal talent team who want to save costs, the delivery team who want the most experience they can get, the manager who wants to develop the long-term strategy for the team together, working out which is the most important priority at the time and getting them aligned so they're working together as a unit rather than trying to solve 3 different problems and the conflict that brings. And then taking a data-driven approach to the feedback of this as well. And I've shared a couple of examples on this slide here. One about the understanding how many candidates are coming through the pipeline at any different point in time. I find it really helpful to visualize these things as well, to be able to keep stakeholders informed of what's going on and then learn from the cause and effect of when we try new things like marketing campaigns, for example, and get the real visual feedback upon what's happened there. So we see how many people are coming through the pipeline there. And then also understanding our different sources and our relative success. So the columns that I have at the bottom with the different colors and figures highlighted represent, one of those might be candidates that come through LinkedIn, another might be referrals, another might be different agencies, and seeing what patterns do we see over time, and then letting the data drive about how do we evolve our strategy and actively looking to change that week on week to get the best out of the company, the process, and the market, rather than just sort of taking a one-size-fits-all approach. And calling on our Kanban practices, they're very much sort of focusing upon the cycle time of continuously monitoring that, trying to iterate it, trying to make it as efficient as it can be, because that's a real key cost, which again, I think we've all experienced at some point during our careers, that when you wait ages for that piece of feedback before an interview process moves forward, that's when a candidate might be lost to another competitor at that point in time. So keeping sharp on that helps avoid that situation cropping up. And reflection questions in relation to the last couple of points there, relating back to training. So where did you last invest in something that you maybe didn't need? Maybe that was training, maybe that was something else that was an investment in it, but it didn't produce value in the end. And back to the recruitment thing, how do you visualize what is working and what isn't to get feedback on that and to bring others on that journey with you? Oh. Moving back home, and yeah, I don't know. One of the things I find that I like about the role, so I mentioned at the start, I like identifying bottlenecks, problem solving, making things more efficient, but that can be something that's quite hard to turn off. So I find myself looking around maybe the supermarket about the queuing system and how they could use an agile practice to make that more effective at the checkout, or things in my house as well. I think my tip on this would be choose how you introduce it if you do spot something to improve, because not everybody wants to hear how to improve. I've dropped a few suggestions and upset a few people over time with this. But I like to practice agile approaches in different ways, and particularly I find it's satisfying to do with physical objects, because I learn things that understand my example, enhance my understanding, sorry, get my words out, and give me nice examples to talk about with people as well. So this sort of brings me on to the living agile part. Before the pandemic, in the bottom right corner of this, we got the room I'm sat in now, which is a multi-function room, which wasn't really achieving that much. And we converted it into a dedicated playroom, which was very fortunate timing, because we got in all our furniture just before everything shut down. And we found that this really worked. We were really using not only this room, but other rooms in our house far better than we had done before. And this sort of got me thinking that this is sort of a visual application of the single responsibility principle. This room's now got a single dedicated purpose. We go and use it for that purpose. Other things aren't interfering with it. It's not interfering with other areas because the play was in one dedicated space rather than absolutely everywhere, which was the previous status quo. And we got sort of a nice visual representation of something that's highly cohesive and loosely coupled. That worked well. And then things changed again. Not completely out of my control in this occasion, because we got a new baby on the way. And for this one, that playroom could be no more, because my office was based upstairs, but we now need another bedroom for the new baby. So we've got to work out a way to get the office downstairs. So my wife and I had a thought about this, and we sat down to discuss it. And I'll ashamedly confess that our first draft of this was a classic big bang project. What are we going to do? Right, well, we'll do an extension at the back of our lounge that creates some more space to play. We'll probably do some reflooring of that at the time as well. We'll replaster, we'll decorate, and we'll get a load of new furniture in. Dreamt about the end result. It sounded great, but then sort of thought, what have we got here? There's quite high cost. This is going to be sort of thousands that we're spending on this. There's lots of dependencies. Extra people are going to have to come in and do some of that building work. And actually, in this climate, who's going to be allowed into the house and when can they? We've got new furniture, so there's now unknown equipment to work with. How soft will that sofa be? How much storage is there in that? This one's only got 4-star reviews, not 5-star. Will that do for us? So this generated a lot of planning, followed by what would be then days of outage, whilst we did this move and work, and potentially a late result that came with that. But in theory, it would ultimately look fantastic and be a little bigger. So I thought about it a bit more and then had another draft idea. And I guess at this point, my agile head sort of screwed back on, which was clearly absent when I was first considering. So rather than what's the best, most amazing thing we could do, what is the simplest thing that we could do with what we've got? Let's not extend for now. That's going to be complicated this year. Let's do that at a later point. And let's not get all of that furniture. We can probably reuse some of what we've got for now, and then we'll get some other things later. We'll do a bit of the decorating. There's a dado rail that's been annoying us for years, so we'll get rid of that. It took an hour to plan and then should be doable in a day, but it still meets the requirement. So compared to all the costs, the dependencies, the risks and everything we had before, this approach of an MVP applied at home has given us a far more achievable result, which gets us moving in the short term. So we then did that. We've got the illustration of the office in the top corner as it is now. And then upon reflecting upon what we've done, I'm sort of like, yeah, it's fine. I'm quite happy with that. Even the little bits of furniture we were going to get, we didn't buy. And I'm now sat here thinking, what was in that other piece of furniture upstairs that I need to bring down? I know I've got 16 of those big IKEA boxes and they're full of something. I've been in my new office for a week and so far I've fetched a phone cable. So maybe there's a bit of, you ain't going to need it in there about what even is all of that stuff that I've got. And then, yeah, just a reflection, I guess, upon sort of keeping it simple there. So taking the agile approach eventually, nearly taking a different dive to it, to how I solved the problem of furniture moving, has saved a lot of cost and given me an equally good result in a much shorter space of time. And this sort of led to the final reflection question here about where could an agile method solve a problem for you outside of work, and where you get one of these challenges or something you're thinking about doing. Do you default to always start with the minimum viable product, or do you go like I did at first for the what's the best, most amazing thing that I can have, and all the complexity that might bring? Fine. A couple of slides and we're wrapped up at this point. One thing then was just to talk through current issues that I still face at the moment as sort of common things. So agile methods and practices like Scrum, Kanban, and test-driven development are great at helping our understand efficiencies and bottlenecks, and they leave the problems nowhere to hide. The problems are very clearly exposed, but those problems still need fixing, and that doesn't happen for free. So capacity is still a challenge. I think my business, like many businesses, wants to achieve more than we have time available. So I forever have to sort of think about what I can commit to for what's in scope or what isn't, and continuously learn and practice what's good enough in terms of a minimal viable product over what's perfect or what I might like to do. Dependencies and handovers in this management outside a team role are a real challenge. The structure sort of puts me outside of working with some of the immediate individuals, and I find there's quite a lot of asynchronous tasks that you end up doing as a manager as well, where you request something but you have an acceptance that it's going to take a while for somebody to respond in a different team before things come back. And sort of considering the WIP limit there, even for an asynchronous activity, how high do I let that build before I've got too many things to possibly chase up and too much context switching and too much interruption coming back to me as well at that point. And it's important, therefore, to set aside time to really think about what are the repeat problems and how can those be resolved, rather than just accepting those as ongoing tasks. Prioritization, again, I think this is something I've seen as a challenge at multiple levels everywhere I've worked throughout my career. So responding to change, as I sort of put there, is great. We should do that. Things do change and we should be ready to move with it. But ultimately, any time spent on the wrong thing that we ultimately don't do is waste. So we want to use small iterations to minimize the potential for waste, and still challenge that, have we done any prioritization of the thing that we're working on in the first place? And I think the final point there, and an important one for the year that we've been through and the current situation, is remembering to take time to rest. So there's been times recently where my calendar is filled every hour of the day. And what happens when you're 100% utilized is you get a log jam. If a motorway is 100% utilized, nobody's getting on, nobody's getting off, it's going nowhere. And the technique I sort of referenced earlier that I found very beneficial for this is deliberately block booking and leaving spare capacity to take for unplanned work, and also for unplanned home as well. I find the same thing in home life there as well, to enable some sort of flow and sustainable pace to keep going. So bringing it back together, trying to draw some conclusions on this. So I guess my thoughts at the moment are that when we look at the roles that we do, where it sort of comes out of the Scrum Master or the typical Agile delivery type roles, Agile is not yet a default practice everywhere, but those same Agile methods and practices that we apply to delivery limit the scope for failure and waste, and therefore increase the ratio of success and value we can achieve. So I could answer the question that I sort of described earlier about, does an engineering manager have to be Agile, with another question, which is, as an engineering manager, do you want a low risk, limited failure approach where you can put a cap on waste and have a greater opportunity for success and value? And if you do, then being Agile as an engineering manager absolutely helps you achieve some of those things. And the final question to end with then is, where else could Agile methods help? And I've been reflecting here about actually what adds most value and what do I want to do sort of moving forward in my career and how I apply my role here. So would I be best doing Agile? So this is sort of how I saw my Scrum Master role. It was well-established Agile practices, helping individuals who had a good amount of Agile training continue to polish and perfect their sprint delivery practices and get more efficient at that over time. Or is it expanding Agile, where I'm introducing some of those same practices to new parts of the role that are stuck in some very different default practices, and perhaps they've got more to gain from learning some of these things that haven't been applied there for a while, or going beyond that, actually to the point that it's living Agile, which is I've changed those defaults and I now apply Agile as the default to everything I do. So rather than taking some of those initial too much, trying to achieve everything approaches before pulling myself back, the minimum viable product approach just becomes a way of approaching everything as a better solution. That, you may be glad to hear, is it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Russell. That was a great insight to your past 6 to 9 months anyway, and I really appreciate it. If anybody has any questions, yeah, drop them in the chat box at the bottom. It'd be great to see what thoughts are. I was going to ask a little question, actually, Russell.
Yeah, go for it.
Time is not my friend. Yeah,
Yeah.
Time is never there. So how do you organize yourself? I've heard lots of people talk about, I plan 50% of my day, that leaves 50% for the other stuff that happens. How do you organize, and then how do you allow yourself that flex?
Yeah, cool. So in terms of allowing that flex, so I allow myself time for unplanned things that come in through block booking time in my calendar, but then also tweaking this based on demand. So the starting point I had for this was an hour a day, which I called admin time. And that's for dealing with Teams messages, Slack messages, emails, all that sort of stuff that comes in that you just know you're going to be pushing a little bit of that around. And then also another hour a day I turned to Slack time, and that's completely empty, and that's for the unknown stuff that's going to turn up. And that's a starting point. But then what I found useful is to understand what's the actual demand that's coming in against that. And that's where I sort of referenced a little graph earlier of understanding the level of demand of how many requests are people actually making of me in a typical day, and then how many of those am I actually getting through. So I think for the first few weeks I saw that I was being asked for maybe about 50 new things to do in a week, and I could reliably do 30 of them. So there was more demand coming in than I'd set aside time. So at that point, I need to set aside more time to keep up. And then if I get to the point that I've now got more time, so I'm doing more things than I've got coming in, I can release a bit of that time back. But there is ultimately a capacity limit there. There are only so many hours in the day and so many working hours in the day. But what I found helpful through keeping a simple list of things and then being able to visualize stuff back is that when I got to the point that I could now prove the demand coming in is greater than my capacity, and start to have conversations with managers about which of these things would you like me to drop, or also if that's none of them, then we need to get some additional people in to help with this, but having some evidence to back that up rather than it just being a subjective, I personally feel like I'm too busy.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, so from Amy, how do you prioritize across planned, unplanned commitments?
Yeah, excuse me a second. So I think this one is a challenge, and I've definitely not got this perfectly. It depends at which level. If it's different commitments that I've got within my own team members and the people that I manage, I do a very simple. I just categorize them as a high, medium, or low when they come in. I'm actually just using a spreadsheet for these. I've tried Trello and other things in the past, but so far my trusty spreadsheet has been the one that's worked best for me personally, because I can just do a filter and then sort those in order to put the highs at the top and make sure I deal with those okay. But I think there's an important recognition there that sometimes it's understanding what's a priority for the wider group of managers or department or business that you work in as well. And again, what I find helpful there is having shared terms of reference that people can go back to. So I know for my business as usual activities, for example, I would prioritize supporting a new starter over somebody who's been well established for 5 years, because the new starter is more likely to need some help. I would prioritize doing my one-to-ones over doing some new initiative that I might be interested in to make sure I'm keeping a good level of service to the staff that I'm working with. But I guess where I find priorities get harder is in that joint conversation where there's lots of stakeholders involved, where you can get a shared priority list out of people and have that as something to reference back to. That makes the decision making a no-brainer, because everybody can say, well, I'm working on number 3 on the list, yeah, but I want you to work on number 2. Okay, I know that that's the right order to drop that. But securing those agreements is far harder achieved than it is said.
Cool. Thank you very much. Any other questions before we wrap up? No? Okay. Cool. Well, look, Russell, I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
No problem.
Round of applause. And
we've got one from Michael.
One last one. How do you manage the team where some departments do not use Scrum? Oh.
Yeah. I guess there it's about introducing different practices to the teams that you work with. So Scrum's one approach that we've used for years in ASOS. It's worked very well for us, along with Kanban practices as well, and I've enjoyed that. But it doesn't have to be Scrum. I think I was sort of thinking as I went through this, I've not completely got my thoughts in one place about what's the common theme between all of these different things that sort of links them all back together. Fast feedback is a really key one. I think about keeping the scope small, about keeping things well defined, working together as a team and continuously looking to experiment and change the ways you work. And I guess those are the sort of general behaviors that I'd be approaching. I think Scrum's a great framework to do. It's relatively simple to understand and introduce to people. But extreme programming or Kanban and other things also achieve similar things. So those could be tried too.